Yeah.
First of all, who you are and how you come to be here.
Well, my name is Danny Sheehan. I'm an attorney that I was the chief counsel in the Karen Silkwood case out in Oklahoma for the woman who was killed out there, run off the road, and had the documents taken away from her at that nuclear facility out there. And I've also was the attorney in the case where we had the krypton venting at 3 Mile Island was declared illegal just recently by the Circuit Court of Appeals in Washington. And have done some 50 plus trials over the last 10 years of one sort or another I've been involved in and do civil rights work, and am now general counsel for a group called the Christic Institute in Washington, D.C. It's a public interest, public education firm that does legal cases and public education. And how I was invited here, I think, was probably because of work that I'd done representing Dan and Phil Berrigan upon occasion down in Washington and different places in the country. So I was asked as a lawyer to come on to discuss with the people the serious issues that are raised with regard to conspiracy charges and charges of espionage and sabotage against the nuclear industry in the country, and trying to get people down to some of the sort of bedrock of why profoundly people out of a Christian tradition would feel compelled to do this type of thing that is so shocking to most people, to really come to understand why things like that are beginning to happen now, and what the analysis is out of a Christian natural law tradition that raises up those higher obligations. Now, most people, for example, if you give them a concrete image, like if you were alive back in the 1930s in Germany and knew that there were gas chambers where thousands of people were being killed, wouldn't you try to go dismantle one of those places? And in that kind of circumstance, they can say, well, yeah, I would have done that. Or else if you were born back in the 1860s in the United States and there were slaves, wouldn't you have been involved in the Underground Railroad to help them escape? And they don't understand that's all criminal conduct. That is all conduct that is declared to be treasonous. And people keep thinking that we would dare to do that if we had been born back in those times where it was easier to see.
Why don't people see the nature of criminality more clearly these days?
It's a question of perspective, which doesn't tell you much, but the same way the people who were in Germany back in the 1920s and 30s didn't see it. And most of the people who lived back in the 1860s with slavery didn't see it. Because what happens is that we're trained to believe that evil looks different than it really looks. We think it has a black hat and a curly mustache villainous look. And it does not look that way. It looks like the smiling big hand of the president. It looks like the smiling hand of the large corporate executive who is very successful and has a wife and 2.3 kids and a car and stuff like that, and isn't malevolent, on the face of it. The simple fact is that there has been, in my opinion, a certain inadequacy of training on the part of the churches in Western culture, of trying to give simplistic visions of what things look like when they're evil. And that's not how things really look. And that if they were going to look for the real evil, they're going to have to say things that are going to make them very unpopular with the powers and the authorities in the civil government. And there's been a lot of reasons why that hasn't been done. But the fact of the matter is that within the Christian tradition, there have been people who have been adamantly insistent upon following Christian ethical principles. And all through the first century, for that reason, they were condemned as criminal as such by the Roman government. They were outlaws against the Roman government because they refused to acknowledge the authority of those civil government officials over them. And unfortunately, there came a point in time of Constantine where he struck a compromise with the Christian church and said, look, we'll un-outlaw you and give you tax exemption and everything else if you will just don't meddle. Don't go around proselytizing that the stuff that we're doing is morally wrong and unethical and all that stuff. You stay out of government and we'll leave you alone. What's happening now is we're seeing a resurgence of all across the spectrum, people from Judeo-Christian ethic saying, look, if we're going to adhere to the Judeo-Christian ethic, we cannot stay out of issues of politics. We cannot stay out of issues of government. Now, people will be all across the political spectrum, from the right to the left. What you're seeing here is the Christian left, saying that this is not, the Christian right does not have a monopoly on this understanding that your Judeo-Christian ethical principles compel you to take positions politically. And what you're seeing now is the blossoming of the Christian left. And that is the people who believe in the fundamental premises of Christian ethical principles out of natural law. That's what's being discussed down the street in the courthouse now. When a judge in an American court can tell a priest, as he did this morning, that you can't ask this jury whether or not, if they found themselves in the 1930s in Germany, they would have gone and dismantled one of these crematoriums or gas chambers. You can't ask that question because you can't let them know that they are obliged to do something like that in America, that you cannot do. Now that is a sad day when that type of thing takes place in an American courtroom. And there are those of us who've come from around the country to bear witness, to say that that isn't even the law. That isn't even the law. The fact is that there is a perfect, legitimate argument of justification in moral, ethical compulsion that justifies, under certain circumstances, certain types of conduct that might technically be illegal. Whether you have to, tear the door off somebody's house to put it across a gully to save someone's life. If you have to run your car off into a mailbox in order to stop it from killing dozens of school children, you're destroying property, but it's necessity. And this is an issue that is going to be raised in this trial if it isn't totally quashed by the appellate or by the legal system here. And I don't believe it will be quashed, because people who have the courage to go into a nuclear missile plant and physically destroy warheads cannot be threatened by, I'm going to throw you in jail for contempt of court if you attempt to tell this jury why this is like the crematoriums in Germany. And what's he going to do? He's going to throw you in jail for longer? So I don't think that the court is going to be effective here. I think that it is improper what the court is doing. I think that it is illegal, the rulings that it's entering. But I think that in trust that the people who have come here have the courage to stand and to tell our people in the United States what the moral implications are of making nuclear warheads that are condemned by the Pope of the Catholic Church, that they are specifically designed to destroy millions of innocent non-combatants. There's not any doubt about that the executive department of our country will admit that that's what they're for, despite the fact that all the laws of international law say that that is to be condemned, that the Nuremberg Accords, the Geneva Accords, which we signed, totally prohibit developing weapons that are designed primarily for the purpose of destroying non-combatants. And yet we do it.
Just a brief moment here while this guy gets secure.
Okay.
Okay. Well, the question that comes to my mind immediately is, do you feel that Christ was a revolutionary? And if so, in what sense?
Christ was executed by the Roman authorities as a traitor to the government of Rome. That is technically, I'm telling you as a lawyer, that is technically what he was executed for. When the Pharisees wanted to have him done away with, and they were told, they said, we have no law that will allow us to execute someone. So that is why they had to bring him to Pontius Pilate, to say that this man sets himself up as a person who does not obey and is not bound by the authority of this government. What are you going to do about that? So Pilate said, boy, give me a break here. Let me ask him. Come on, JC, tell me. Don't you believe in our government and Caesar? Don't you think that you're bound to obey him? And he said, Christ just said, wrong. The kingdom to which I give my loyalty is not this kingdom. Now, that's all they've got to hear. And you're in serious trouble. Now they will try to pretend that, well, there must be some other kingdom like Russia or China or Cuba or one of these other boogeymen that they try to raise up that somehow our loyalties go to. That's not true. There are even people who say, well, they must be loyal to the Pope in Rome, and all those Catholics are loyal to some other government. It's not true. We are loyal to a higher ethic. And it's not one that there's a whole lot of debate about. I mean, people don't say that, well, that's not true when you say that it's immoral to go killing people. You know, they just say that that's not practical. Or as Henry Kissinger says, you can't expect a nation state to be bound by the same ethical standards and stuff that an individual person would be. That's not true. I have every expectation that our government is going to be bound by the same moral ethical standards as an individual is bound by. That they cannot slaughter the innocent, they cannot starve the hungry around the world, they cannot send military gunships down into El Salvador to kill defenseless people down there. They cannot do this. And what we've come here today to tell them is that they will not do that. And that's the difference. To sit down and say, please don't, or to say to you, you're not going to do that, are two very different. And the time has come when we've passed from the former to the latter.
Are you saying then that people who are professed Christians should then also be professed revolutionaries?
It, as I say, in these times, I think that it is essential in a certain sense. For example, I don't believe that it's necessary to overthrow democracy. I believe thoroughly in democracy. Why is it that we don't get to vote on these things? Why is it that the executive department lies to us and says that, oh, there was a PT boat that attacked our destroyer in Vietnam at the Bay of Tonkin? Why does that turn out to be total fabrication? Why are we told that somehow, you know, we have to go down and invade El Salvador with our gunships because somehow the real thing that's going on there is Soviet agents are somehow trying to overthrow this government down there, when it's palpably untrue? When what you have is a dictatorship totally suppressing the people, the vast majority of people in their country, like we've heard about a long time. It's not anything new to the American people. They know what a dictator looks like. They know what's going on in South Korea. But they can't quite believe that the executive department will lie to them. But the fact of the matter is they do. So it's not required to be a revolutionary to overthrow the government. What's necessary is to be revolutionary to revolve, to take the sort of underlying ethical principles that undergird our entire theory of government and get them back up into the ascendancy, to turn this thing around, to turn our government back on its feet instead of on its head, the way it is now. And the people of our country are sorely perplexed. They do not understand why in the world this stuff is happening. They just don't understand. But the problem is that they still place their loyalty to this particular nation state in a superior position to their heart and to the Judeo-Christian ethical principles that they have been brought up to know and to understand.
Do you think that this is simply and clearly only an issue that's related to Judeo-Christian ethic, or whether it transcends the religious separation, you could say, between Buddhism and Hinduism?
Yeah, I hear. Well, that's a real fundamental question, because there are some distinctions. Now, the mystical faculties that the species is reported to have are the same, whether it be Buddhism or Hinduism or Catholicism or Protestantism, Judaism. Any of the basic world religions have a very clear understanding that there's a very particular faculty that our species has, which is able to discern a certain referent. It's an experience, a very important experience of which we're capable. In that it is a referent. They refer to it as a harmony, a tune, a balance, which is an ethical norm. It's the underpinning of all moral ethical standards in law. Okay, in that sense, they're the same. Culturally, they've been translated in different ways. One of the important things about Christianity is that there is an essential element of love that is supposed to translate itself into action. Now, with Buddhism and Hinduism, there's a very passive type of stance, is that that you can sit back, become centered, exercise this faculty of discernment to see how patently out of tune things are. But it's somewhat silly to become involved or embroiled in trying to say, look, this person's right or that person's wrong, because it's all Maya. It's all illusion. It's a false dichotomy. Everything is unified. Everything's fine. Now, that's overstating it somewhat. But in Christianity, the peculiar element is that this love, this type of affirmation of unity and harmony, is to be translated into action. To find people when they're starving and to feed them. To find people when they're cold and naked and to clothe them. To find people who are out in the cold winter and to shelter them. There's a very peculiar ethic in the Judeo-Christian social ethic to translate this type of awareness into action. And it's not something that can be satisfied with simply going to church on Sunday and sitting in the pews and going mea culpa, or going to beach in a game of dominoes or any of the stuff that goes on. That what it is you are morally bound to get up from the pews and to move out and to transform the structures of injustice and to bring about justice on the planet for the sake of our survival. So there's a certain utilitarian ethic that sort of sneaks its way in there, but that's not what motivates Judeo-Christian ethical people.
Okay, I'm real interested in the separation between political action